Welcome to part 2 of my little series breaking down how to program drums. In the first part I explained what all the basic editing tools are and how to perform some pretty useful MIDI functions to achieve realistic articulations. And now in this part I'm going to break down how to actually use all of these tools to come up with a whole bunch of different grooves. I've chosen a selection of famous patterns and pretty popular beats that work or appear in a range of different styles and contexts, and hopefully by the end of this you'll have a pretty decent understanding of how to achieve almost any type of groove or feel in your drum patterns. This is how I would start with a kind of bread and butter hip hop or rock groove. Well, to be honest, it's this beat can just work in so many different styles, and it basically just depends what kit tone you're using, kind of defines what the genre is. So I'm just going to do this simple kick, snare sort of thing. So the trick here is to use like a molar hi-hat technique, which is kind of a bouncing technique. Down, up. So you have your main accent of the hi-hat here, and then this little note here is like the bounce of the stick as you lift your wrist back up, and you get that kind of hidden ghost note sort of thing there. And we can basically just repeat that across this measure here, and that will give us sort of the shell of kind of hip-hop groove. Put in some quiet snare ghost notes on sort of spaces like that. Now what's quite fun about that pattern is this is basically in half time, but you can easily make this a kind of drum and bass or faster pulse groove by just changing where these snare hits are happening. So that just kind of turned it into classic kind of drum and bass D&B pattern sort of thing there. Okay, let's talk about one of the greatest drum patterns ever made, the Amen break. I think this break kind of speaks for itself, but I'm just going to chat about it for a second because it's fun. So the original break is around 130 BPM. To get started with this, you can use this molar hi-hat pattern again, just to get it going. Let's just think about how the pattern goes. So it starts with this simple 1, 2, 3 thing. And then it has that little moment of ghost notes where it goes right, left. And then let's put the other snare hit here. So the other little detail is this little double kick thing that happens here, like a little double stroke roll. So another snare ghost note here between this pattern. And if we pretty much just copy that out. And then of course, when it gets to this point, it does something a little different. So here, this bit becomes the accent. I think this snare gets pushed to here. And then you have this little roll here with the double kick again. So let's copy that double kick over. And then there's another little left, right somewhere in here. And then you have the big that happens here. I think this is it. Not quite. So let's loop that. So that's pretty much the Amen break as it was originally. And you know, you can put in more of these ghost notes if you want to. And if I start speeding that up whilst it's playing, you'll hear how it obviously arrives at kind of drum and bass. And there's a few little things I wanted to point out when you get to that. Couple cool little tips to get some cool phrasings out of this. So So that's the arm and break now at 170 BPM, and you can hear once I get up to this speed, this little double kick thing, I personally think it starts to sound maybe a little bit silly or like a little bit too much, and I just want to show the subtle differences that can happen in the feel when you shove this kick around onto like shoving it back a grid line, basically. So let's just do that. Just compare the difference of what happens when I put this kick directly behind the snare here, rather than on that hit here. So you can kind of make it feel a bit quicker or snappier just by having that. And then another kind of common roll, or something that you get in drum and bass a lot, is this kind of like, so you can hear that that's quite a cool way to get that kind of, it's like a 5-note pattern. So if you grab that and copy that out like so. So that's quite a fun way to start getting some, you know, like choppy fills. So and it's also fun to just put a silly, stupid plugin on, like something like Live Cut, to just glitch it out. And if you're going for that kind of choppy, random jungle thing. And also, if you've got something like Addictive Drums, you can just scroll through presets whilst your break is playing through Live Cut like this, and then you're getting your own kind of custom-made, glitchy drum and bass breaks and stuff like that, rather than using samples or like pre-made loops. You can kind of make them yourself this way. So that is a lot of fun. Okay, now I'm going to talk about
the Purdie Shuffle. Ow!
Which is one of the most famous and recognisable drum grooves out there, and it's one of my personal favourites. There's a lot of fun that you can have with this pattern, and there's a lot of different things that you can do with it once you kind of have your head wrapped around it. It was invented by Bernard or Bernard Purdie, depending on where you want to put the stress. And yeah, it's a pretty famous video out there where the man himself breaks down the pattern, but it can be a little bit tricky to understand what he's on about if you're not a drummer.
It's quarters, it's eighths, triplets. Dial, bam, dial, bam, bam, boy, boy, boy.
I think before you start trying to program a kind of realistic groove like this, good to have an understanding of how the drummer is actually playing it, or how you would physically accomplish that kind of groove on a real kit. And I think kind of the core or the main thing about the Purdie Shuffle that gets it going is just this 3-note pattern, and it's 2 hits on the hi-hat and 1 hit on the snare. So you get basically that, but if you speed it up. At the start of the sequence, the kick drum and the hi-hat play together, so you get right? And the hi-hat pattern throughout most of this is basically just going to for most of it. And then in between that, these little quiet ghost notes on the snare are just filling the spaces in between, right? So it's just part way through the pattern, kind of halfway through it, you get that big crack of a snare accent. And then once the snare accent happens, the hi-hat pattern shifts slightly and it stops being this double thing. It just goes to a right, left kind of thing. So you get like a couple of other things to kind of spice this groove up is these little kind of snare rolls into a kick, and obviously combining that again with a hi-hat bark. So in terms of achieving that technique or that sound, different drummers kind of like to do it differently. You can think about it in terms of just being like a very quick double that leads into the kick, so you get like, I'm not very good at that, but some drummers who are very precise will prefer to do a specific kind of thing. And you can see in my drum programming, I tend to do that. I will program 2 tiny ghost notes behind the kick to get that. But another way of achieving that is to just kind of press the stick into the head like that. And you get that kind of brrr. thing going on, and then just put a kick drum and an open hi-hat after that, and you get... And yeah, just kind of chaining all of that together with the pattern is kind of how you can kind of spice it up. So So with that kind of thing in mind, we can start emulating that on a grid here with programming. So I'm just going to map out the rudiment pattern. So you've got like your hi-hat here, which is to start the sequence, and then the left note here, which is the ghost note. So we get that. And then we have the double right hit that happens here. So that gets us the right, left, right, right. And then we're going to go right, left, right, right, left, right, right.
Right, left, 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 right, left, right, right. It's a pattern I grew up with.
And then we can put our snare accent here. Okay, now I can just kind of copy that out. And if I loop that, let's give that a quick play. So you can hear that that's the rudiment, or roughly the sticking of what the Purdie Shuffle is, but you can hear it's not quite right.
Right, right, right.
Because by clicking everything in like that, and I've got the snapping on here, everything has snapped itself to grid values. So the trick with this pattern, or the trick with this feel or this groove, is basically knowing which quantization value to use. If I select all, I can either, click and drag the whole pattern, or I can just hit Command A to select everything like that. And then if I come over to this quantizing menu here on the left, the value I need is this 8th note triplets. And if I hit that, you can see what that just did is shuffled everything around onto off-grid values. And if I give that a play now, and that has just started to give me the characteristic feel of the Purdie Shuffle. Now the proper Purdie Shuffle itself is actually in 3/4, but you can the fun thing about this groove is you can flip between different time signatures and kind of create fun illusions with it. I'll get into that in a minute. But yeah, that should be pretty recognizable. I think the influence of this pattern or groove, I'd say, is up there with something like the Amen break. So many drummers and different styles of music use this pattern or do creative things with it, and I'd argue that it's the root of where things like trap or kind of hip-hop triplet grooves come from, with that kind of the hi-hat pattern going in triplets over the rock solid kick and snare. If I, for example, put all of these notes on the hi-hat and then just set them to one specific kind of set volume. Just chucking in hi-hat barks around the place can be pretty fun. And then yeah, with these hi-hats now that have been shuffled off the grid, I can kind of use those as markers to line up other kick accents. Let's just put in a few more kicks on sort of random spaces and then quantize it to see what happens. But yeah, the true pattern is actually in 3/4, so if I just change to that, let's just get this going in 3/4 again. Something like that, hang on. And yeah, just kind of thinking about the hi-hat bark thing and just, chucking a few of these around onto unusual off-grid accents can start getting you some kind of really fun technical sounding results. So there's way further that you can go with this because of the nature of this pattern being in triplets, as well as the kind of straight thing with the kick and snare always happening on these reliable grid downbeats, right? And it opens up the potential for kind of more advanced concepts to easily happen. Things like metric modulation. Depending on how you use accents, you can kind of trick the ear or alter the perception of the groove to make it feel like it's shifting between different time signatures without ever actually changing time signature, and doing things like kind of weird, trippy musical illusions that spin your listeners out.
1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, woo!
Shit, he's done something there, hasn't he? How'd you do that?
I think that what's happening is 2 or maybe 3 different musical things all at the same time.